A ministerial inquiry into the problem of forestry debris, or slash, on the east coast has resulted in damning findings. It describes an environmental disaster.
The boss of one of the forestry companies blamed for slash damage in Tairāwhiti has apologised.
Very apologetic, very sorry. We need to put our hand up and say that we need to do something that's different. This is starting to divide families as the COVID vaccination did back in the day.
The forestry industry has been in the spotlight and under fire. Post-cyclone slash has dominated headlines and divided communities.
The report blames the forestry sector for losing its social licence and for poor practice in the Tairāwhiti region.
If you did this to your neighbour's property, where would you be?
It was so horrible. It's absolutely heartbreaking. Things do need to change.
Now, could forestry companies on the East Coast move offshore?
If I was a board member of these companies, I'd be seriously asking myself why we are still in Gisborne. What are we doing here? We're not making money.
Kia ora, I'm Amanda Gillies, and on The Detail today, the future of forestry. Will it stay or will it go? Slash wreaked havoc across the east coast during cyclones Hale and Gabrielle, but new rules meant to protect from the same thing happening again have created hurdles for the forestry industry, and some businesses are now bleeding money. Forestry Industry Chief Julian Conn spoke to the Gisborne District Council Sustainable Tairāwhiti Committee this month. The 65-year-old has worked in the forestry industry for 45 years and wasn't shy about delivering some tough facts to his audience. This is audio from that meeting.
Just to dispel some dispersions about some people believe that these big bad forest industry owners are sending all their profits overseas. This is public information which is from Aratu Forest here locally. That really indicates that they haven't sent a cent overseas for the last 3 years. They're literally bleeding money. They spend $50 million a year in this district. Why are they doing that? You need to ask the board. If I was a board member, and the other companies are very similar, if I was a board member of these companies, I'd be seriously asking myself why we are still in Gisborne. What are we doing here? We're not making money. Capital is very mobile. Those companies could very easily decide tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, I don't know, that they'll cut their losses and they'll go to Australia or South Africa or somewhere else where they can make better money in the forest industry. Forestry in New Zealand generally is extremely difficult. Forestry in Gisborne is worse than extremely difficult. Everybody I talk to in the industry at the moment is, we're not going to invest in Gisborne. One of the local forest investors here, who you would all know, very big international company, said to me the other day, Julian, my overseas board is telling me that we could invest $100 million in a processing operation in Gisborne. I'm telling them, this is the New Zealand manager, I'm telling them not to bother at the moment because of the issues we are having about being able to extract our timber off the hill and put it into those processing facilities.
Rules, regulations and resource consent, he said, were absolutely impossible to comply with.
The first issue is, how do we stop the rot? How do we stop those forest companies from moving away out of our district tomorrow or next week or next year? And there's specific terms and conditions in our current harvesting and roading rules that are literally stopping forest companies from harvesting. I'll give you an example. Standard condition harvesting and planting consent, clause 89, there's about 125 of them last time I looked. Clause 89 basically says that you cannot emit any debris. Council can't give us a definition of what debris is. Is it a rock? We don't know. There's not a lot else up there. You cannot emit any sediment and you cannot emit any woody debris into those streams and waterways ever. Not today, not tomorrow, not 5 years' time, ever. Now that condition is absolutely impossible I'm sure you know, you cannot do that. So that condition, along with others, shall we say, is making those forest managers go, okay, I can't comply with that condition, so I'm not going to harvest. Or, even more perverse, they decide to, A, shut the gate and walk away, as I said. So there's no activity in the forest, there's no harvesting, no silviculture, no planting, no management. What happens to those forests next time we have a weather event? Instead of 2-tonne logs coming down through the creeks, we're going to have 5-tonne or 8-tonne. And they'll have nice big bowling ball root balls on them, which will be coming down and landing on our beaches and doing other perverse infrastructural damage. Is that really what we want? The most profitable way to run a forest at the moment is to do that, is to lock the gate and sell the carbon. Carbon the other day was $61 a tonne, it's gone up from 45. It's actually quite a good business model if you're into that sort of thing. If your land qualifies, then you can make very good money out of it. So why wouldn't they do that? They don't want to do that. They want to be harvesting and they want to be processing and they want to be doing things in Gisborne which makes everybody happier and we get a community that we all want. They can make some money and then they can send some money overseas. But they can't do it alone.
Put simply, harvesting and processing means vital jobs. So it's a big issue with big implications and fallout.
This issue is a gnarly one. I don't think it's going to be solved overnight. I think there are a lot of interest groups who are keen to find a solution, but it's not going to be simple because, I think it's obvious that forestry in that area can't continue the way it has been.
That's newsroom business journalist Tina Morrison, who has been investigating the story of forest harvesting grounding to a halt in Tairāwhiti.
You've got to feel for people who have invested millions in this area and were encouraged by the government to do so. So, they will be feeling aggrieved as well and wondering what they do with all that sunk investment.
This is huge. How damaging is this for the region?
Well, it's a big problem. Forestry is important for the Gisborne Tairāwhiti region. It accounts for about 5% of their GDP. It's about around 3% of employment. And, it's not only the people employed in forestry, it's also the transport operators, the local port, all the other services that support the forestry industry that are affected if that harvesting can't continue.
It's huge. When I covered some of Cyclone Gabrielle, and I think they said 1 in 4 jobs in the area is linked to forestry. It puts, food on tables and a roof over heads. I mean, hugely important to the region, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. Just using the port as an example, without logs going through the port, there is pretty much no business there. So, it is vital to that area, but, they can't keep doing what they have been doing.
Before we go on, a quick history lesson. Gisborne was hit hard by Cyclone Gabrielle in 1988 and massive landslides caused devastating destruction. To prevent this from happening again, the government came up with the East Coast Forestry Project in 1992. Grants were given to plant fast-growing radiata pine, thought to have the appropriate root strength to stabilise the steep land prone to erosion. The emissions trading scheme followed. Pine trees make carbon credit, which could be sold to offset carbon emissions.
So, it was a double whammy. 2 big government schemes incentivising the planting of pine trees. And plant pine trees they did everywhere. They now cover 1.5 million hectares across the country. But that double whammy of pine planting near Gizzy was a ticking time bomb. We now know that when harvested, there can be weakened roots, serious erosion and damage to the soil structure.
So, when storms hit from 2018, the slash started to come down. It came to a head during Cyclone Gabrielle. The local beaches for kilometres were carpeted with logs and debris. It was ugly, destructive and fatal. A young boy died while playing on one of the washed-up logs. But Julian Conn says that 48% of the debris on Waikanae Beach from the last weather event in Gisborne wasn't radiata pine, meaning it didn't come from the forest.
Where did the rest of it come from? What do we do about the other 50%? And it tells us that we live in a woody environment and there will always be wood coming down the rivers and the streams. There will always be sediment coming down the woods and the streams. You cannot stop it. It's a matter of managing it appropriately to a level which is acceptable for the community. That's something that the industry has been working on for some years, perhaps the last 6 years, and that the industry, although you can't see it unless you go out into the forestry, has been working very, very hard to try and mitigate those issues. I'll give you some examples where you used to spend $15,000 building a skid. We're now spending $50,000. We're doing more benching, we're doing more earth movement, we're doing more water control. We're pulling more slash up off the side of the skids and putting it in appropriate places where it's far more stable. We used to spend commonly on average $100,000 a kilometre building a road. We now spend 3 times that, just trying to make better roads to mitigate the issues which we've been having since these weather events have occurred. Before we had weather events, it didn't seem to be an issue. You know, there wasn't woody debris coming down. There wasn't so much issue with sediment coming into our waterways. But we have got climate change. We just have to accept that, and then we understand that it needs to make improvements with what it's doing.
The problem has come about because, you know, while it might be a good idea to plant trees to stabilise the land, the method of harvesting those trees is clear felling, and so you just take all the trees out at once and it leaves erosion-prone land with no cover at all. And if you get a big rainfall event during that time, you know, there's absolutely no protection, and that is what has caused such devastation to the area.
It has been a devastating time. That's the right word to use. You have also spoken to geologists. What are they saying?
Well, they are pointing to this method of clear felling in particular, that it's just really not sustainable for the land to take out a whole forest at once. That's not the way things would happen in nature. And this has exacerbated the problem. I mean, if you were to harvest some of the trees and leave some there, then that would be more sustainable. But this practice of taking everything out just really exposes the land. But the issue, of course, is that's how the economy works for plantation forestry. You know, foresters don't particularly want to come in and take out a few logs and then come back and take out a few more. You know, this method of taking everything out at once is more economic for them, but it's not good for the environment.
At all. And you throw in climate change. How is this changing the game for the industry? How are they coping with it?
Well, you know, these sort of storms that we're having are going to become more frequent. You know, Treasury said that there's an 80% chance of another Cyclone Gabrielle scale event happening in the next 50 years. So what these, you know, huge cyclone storms that we have experienced in recent times are going to become more frequent. So, you know, we can't continue doing what we have been doing with plantation forestry, and, you know, we have to find another way of either doing forestry or something else to do on that land.
Because part of the issue that the forestry industry is talking about are the rules and regulations, the resource consent. They're trying to do their best, but they are saying it's horrendous. It's really, they can't comply with them. It's making their job difficult. Is it as bad as they claim? Is it a real issue?
Well, the rules are changing, particularly around, you know, what they call slash in erosion-prone areas, and also those very steep hillsides that the rules are changing for what you can do on those areas. Like you might not be able to plant forests or, farm those areas in the future. So those rules are changing. We're kind of in a state of flux at the moment, or kind of a rebalancing where the government and the district council are trying to figure out where the balance is, how forestry and farming could still continue, but where the line is basically. And there's kind of a bit of a tussle going on of finding out what is sustainable and what could happen in the future. So we are in a bit of state of flux.
So the forestry bosses don't like the rules, the regulations, the resource consent, but some people are embracing the new rules. Tell us about this.
Well, there is a recognition that things have to change. Environmental groups say that, this is kind of a wake-up call and things do need to change and we can't continue the way we have been. And that maybe, forestry companies just have to realise that you can't continue harvesting these areas like you have in the past, that it's going to be economically tough. But that's the reality.
It's huge. What is the government doing to address the problems? Are they doing enough?
Well, the government is looking at softening some rules, for example, slash and lower risk areas, that they may loosen the rules to mean that it's not all banned. And they're also looking at perhaps having more of national regulations across the country rather than allowing local councils like Gisborne to implement their own rules. But it's controversial because Gisborne is a particular area of that very steep erosion-prone land. So yeah, it hasn't been sorted out yet, but it's certainly under discussion. I mean, from the government's perspective, they want the economy to grow, and forestry is an important part of that. It's the third largest commodity export after dairy and meat. And, there's a lot of people who have invested a lot of money in those forests. And so it's about trying to find a balance of, can you harvest and still have an economic return, but protect the environment as well.
East Coast National MP Dana Kirkpatrick was at the Gisborne District Council Sustainable Tairāwhiti Committee meeting and told councillors that the government was making changes to the national standard on commercial forestry, which would provide some clarity.
It is a very challenging environment, as we know. It can be emotionally charged, it is tricky, but it is also a critical component of our region and our community. And if I could just say, for me, it's important that we understand all of those aspects in terms of the social, economic and environmental return and find the balance that we can all live with. So for me, that's the critical component. I think the government has invested about $110 million in this region in getting woody debris and sediment off beaches and out of rivers. And that's an enormous amount of money, and as a society we can't continue to do that. So this work is critical, and it's really important for us to be able to work together. I acknowledge the council's role in that, and I acknowledge the fact that you're sitting at the table with we in the forestry sector to do this work, which is really commendable. I am a supporter of the forestry sector, and largely because of the impact and the contribution it makes to the economic sustainability of our region and our town and our community in terms of jobs and the money that is spent in our town and many of those businesses that you might not even think about, the tyre businesses, the diesel mechanics, all of the places that employ our people and look after us as a community. So it's critical that we find a good way forward.
Could you imagine the East Coast without forestry? I mean, the fallout, the devastation from that?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it is an important industry for that area. But, some people are looking at native forests. Could we replace some of those pine plantations with native forestry? Not necessarily for harvest, but yeah, there's a lot of work going on about what could we replace it with, and could it be native vegetation? And if so, how could that potentially generate an economic return? You know, could there be something under the ETS that would get a return for native vegetation, some sort of biodiversity credit, or, you know, people are grappling with if they can't do forestry in a pine plantation way, what could they do so that people of that area can still earn an income and get a return?
Log prices, though, Tina, at the moment, how are they looking and what does this mean for forestry owners?
Well, it's not a great time for the forestry industry in terms of log prices, because they are largely influenced by overseas demand, and particularly China is our largest market for logs. And the Chinese market is, you know, quite weak at the moment. So that's not helping get a return for the foresters either. And the domestic market is also quite weak because, you know, our economy has slowed down, and that means home building has slowed down. So, you know, it's hard for mills here as well. So it's just compounding the problem really for those foresters.
So fair to say not a good time for forestry at the moment.
No, not a good time at all.
That's all for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Thank you to Tina Morrison. This episode was produced by Davina Zimmer and Gwen McClure and engineered by Jeremy Ansell. I'm Amanda Gillies. Mā te wā.